I was sitting in my living room watching television when I heard the unmistakable sound of my back door lock being worked, followed by the soft click of the door opening. I recognized those sounds instantly. After 15 years working in federal corrections, I had been trained to identify security breaches on instinct and respond to threats with controlled, deliberate force. My name is Bobby Marcato. I am 41 years old and currently serve as a correctional officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in El Reno, Oklahoma, where I have spent the last 15 years supervising inmates, maintaining institutional security, and physically controlling violent offenders inside one of the most demanding environments in law enforcement. My career required constant awareness, the ability to assess threats in seconds, and extensive training in defensive tactics, restraint procedures, and controlling individuals who had no intention of complying. All of that training was reinforced by strict protocols designed to ensure the line between appropriate force and excessive violence was never crossed. Years of mandatory physical conditioning and daily confrontations with hostile inmates had left me solidly built. But more importantly, I carried the mental discipline that comes from surviving 15 years in an environment where a moment of lost control could be fatal. My home in Yukon, a quiet suburb west of Oklahoma City, was my refuge from a federal prison. It was where my wife, Tamara, and I had lived peacefully for 8 years while raising our 2 young daughters. It was a calm neighborhood, the kind of place where nobody expects trouble, and certainly not the kind of place where someone would be foolish enough to break into the home of a federal corrections officer. Still, nothing in my 15-year career had prepared me for how satisfying it would feel to apply professional restraint training to criminals who thought they were dealing with an ordinary civilian instead of someone who controlled violent felons for a living. I rose from the couch and moved quickly but silently toward the back of the house, stopping in a hallway where I had a clear view of the kitchen and the rear entrance. 2 men stepped inside through my back door. Both were wearing black sleeveless tactical-style vests and holding flashlights, despite the fact that it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and daylight filled the house. They clearly expected the place to be empty and had likely been watching and waiting for what they believed was the perfect opportunity. One was heavy-set with graying hair, the other younger, thinner, and completely shaved bald. They began moving through my kitchen, scanning the room and searching for something. I observed them for roughly 10 seconds, mentally documenting their actions the same way I was trained to document inmate incidents. Before stepping fully into view, "Gentlemen," I said evenly, my voice carrying the authority that comes from 15 years of commanding federal inmates, "you just broke into the wrong house. You're going to put your hands on your head and get on your knees right now." Both men jumped, clearly stunned to discover they weren't alone. The older man, who I would later learn was named Roscoe Blackwell, attempted to assert control. He claimed they were HOA property inspectors authorized to enter due to emergency code violations, stating they had knocked and received no answer before entering under emergency authority. I didn't move. "You broke my lock and entered my home illegally," I replied calmly. "I am a federal corrections officer. I control violent inmates every day. You are going to follow my instructions immediately, or I will physically control you until the police arrive. Hands on your head, on your knees. Now." The younger man, Clarence Porter, reached toward his waistband. That decision triggered pure training. I closed the distance instantly, secured his arm using joint manipulation techniques I employed daily on inmates, redirected his balance, and placed him face down on my kitchen floor in under 3 seconds, his arm locked behind him in a textbook restraint hold. "Do not move," I told him calmly. "Moving will cause pain. Staying still will not." Roscoe tried to run, keeping Clarence control with one hand. I used my leg to sweep Roscoe's feet out from under him, dropping him hard to the floor. Within 5 seconds, both intruders were restrained on my kitchen floor using techniques I had practiced thousands of times on inmates far more dangerous than these amateurs. Moments later, my wife Tamara came down the stairs after hearing the noise. She took one look at the scene and immediately called 911, calmly reporting that 2 men had broken into our home and that her husband, a federal corrections officer, had them restrained. I maintained control of both suspects until Yukon police arrived 4 minutes later. Officer Monroe and 3 additional officers entered with weapons drawn. then visibly relaxed when they saw me maintaining proper control posture over both men. "Sir, are you law enforcement?" Officer Monroe asked. "Federal Corrections Officer at FCIL Reno." I answered. They entered through the back door illegally. Both suspects are secured using standard correctional control techniques. They are restrained and uninjured. Officer Monroe and his partners took custody of both suspects while I provided a detailed account of what had occurred. A sheriff supervisor arrived shortly afterward, and once he learned that I was a federal corrections officer who had restrained the intruders using professional control techniques, his expression shifted. There was clear respect and an immediate understanding that this incident went far beyond routine burglary. "Officer Marcato," the supervisor said, "breaking into the residence of a federal employee while that employee is present can carry federal charges, especially when a law enforcement officer's home is involved." Detective Whitman arrived to handle the investigation. He inspected my back door and immediately noted clear signs of deliberate lock manipulation. He photographed the black tactical vest worn by both suspects and recovered tools consistent with lockpicking from Roscoe's pockets. "Mr. Marcato," he explained, "these men came equipped with burglary tools and lockpicks. They forcibly entered your home while you were inside. Under Oklahoma law, burglary of an occupied residence is classified as first-degree burglary, which is considered a violent felony. And because you are a federal corrections officer, there may also be federal charges related to targeting a federal employee's residence." The scope of the case expanded when the FBI became involved. Special Agent Whitman explained that burglaries involving federal law enforcement residences are reviewed federally due to potential for retaliation or deliberate targeting of federal personnel. "Officer Marcato," Agent Whitman asked, "do you have any reason to believe these individuals knew you were a federal corrections officer?" I told him I didn't know for certain, but I also explained that I wear my uniform to work daily. My vehicle displays federal employee parking permits, and anyone monitoring my home would easily identify me as an employee of the Bureau of Prisons. As the investigation continued, the FBI uncovered that Roscoe and Clarence had been operating a fraudulent HOA scheme as a front for organized burglary. They would claim authority to conduct inspections, identify valuables, and later return a break-in when residents were believed to be away. What they failed to realize was that they had targeted the home of a federal corrections officer, and that officer was inside at the time. What elevated the case to federal prosecution was the fact that they entered a federal employee's residence while that employee was present, triggering enhanced federal penalties intended to protect federal workers from intimidation and targeting. Federal charges were filed alongside state burglary charges. Roscoe and Clarence now faced Oklahoma first-degree burglary charges for entering an occupied residence, as well as federal charges for targeting a federal corrections officer's home. The prosecutor explained the dual-track approach clearly. The state charges address the burglary itself. The federal charges address the targeting of a federal employee. Together, they ensure full accountability. The trial took place 9 months later in federal court. I testified about hearing the break-in, encountering the intruders in my kitchen, and using my professional training to restrain them until law enforcement arrived. My restraint methods were presented as evidence of controlled, appropriate professional response rather than excessive force. Prosecutors emphasized that the suspects entered a federal corrections officer's home equipped with tools and wearing tactical gear, demonstrating intent and planning. Officials from the Bureau of Prisons testified about the importance of protecting correctional staff and why crimes involving their residences are treated with heightened seriousness. Evidence linked Roscoe and Clarence to 7 additional burglaries using the same fake HOA tactic. However, the decision to break into a federal employee's home while he was present made this case uniquely severe. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all state and federal counts. Sentencing followed strict federal guidelines for targeting federal employees and state statutes for violent burglary. Roscoe received an 18-year federal sentence. Clarence was sentenced to 14 years. Both would serve their time within the federal prison system, though, for obvious reasons, not at my facility. 2 months later, I was leading defensive tactics training for new correctional officers at FCIL Reno. I used the home invasion as a real-world training example. The same control techniques we use on inmates apply to anyone who threatens you. I explained. Two men enter my home. I use joint manipulation, arm restraints, and leg sweeps, standard techniques we train here. Within seconds, both suspects were on the ground, controlled, and unable to resist. Professional training works when you need it. One trainee asked, "Officer Marcato, were you scared when you realized someone broke into your house?" I answered honestly. My training engaged before fear had time to. 15 years of muscle memory. I assessed the threat, formed a response, and executed with control. That's exactly what we teach. Control through training, not panic. That evening, Tamara and I were having dinner when she brought it up. "When I came downstairs and saw you controlling those two men on our kitchen floor," she said, "it looked effortless, like you were just doing your job." I nodded. I was doing my job. Federal corrections officers are law enforcement. Those men broke into a law enforcement officer's home. I applied my training as designed, restrained them without injury, and held them for police. "They got 18 and 14 years, Tamara said quietly. Federal charges for targeting a federal employee, plus state charges for violent burglary. They didn't just break into the wrong house because I was home. They broke into the wrong house because targeting a federal corrections officer triggers federal prosecution. Most criminals never expect. If you are a federal employee, law enforcement officer, or corrections professional and experience threats, targeting, or burglary at your residence, report it immediately to both local police and federal authorities. Federal charges may apply. Share your experiences in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of criminals making catastrophic targeting mistakes. And remember that federal employees receive enhanced legal protections. Professional restraint training works when it matters. Document everything and pursue both state and federal prosecution whenever applicable.